Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Main, and I am the author of several books, including Black Coral, which just hit 50,000 copies sold, which is awesome for me. If you read it, doesn't really matter how many other people read it, but that was really good news. Last week, the prequel, the book that came first, The Girl Beneath the Sea, was a finalist for the International Thriller Writers Thriller Award. I am super flattered and beside myself over that. That was amazing. Coming in September is Mastermind, which is a Theo Cray and Jessica Blackwood novel. Theo Cray is the hero of my Naturalist series, and Jessica Blackwood has been in her series of books for several years, and I'm super excited to have them all together. So, kind of exciting news. It's nice to have people read my books. I would still write them if nobody read them, but it's even better to share them. I'm here to talk about writing, creativity, etc., whatever you want. If you have questions, there is a live chat. We're using YouTube because for some reason I can never get Twitter Live to work. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong and I'm like stupid. So I'm here and I see myself and I've got at least one person watching right now. Of course, the cool thing about this is I can save the stream and people can watch it later on. But enough about that. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the new platform that Amazon is launching called Kindle Vella. Many people haven't heard about this, but what this is if you're a writer, an indie writer, or working with a publisher, perhaps, you can write a story and publish it in installments, and then people would pay tokens to read the next edition, the next chapter, whatever. There are other platforms out there like this. This isn't a new thing, but it's new for Amazon to do this. Presently, Amazon offers several opportunities for writers. There is the traditional, put your book on Amazon, have it carried by a publisher. There's the KDP, the Kindle Digital Publishing Platform. What this allows is you can self-publish. This is how I got my start in writing. I published my first novellas and novels as an indie writer, and that was how I built up my audience. And some of the people that I talked to in live streams, et cetera, or people I met through there, which was pretty cool. That is a great entry point. It's not the only entry point, but it's really cool because there are a number of writers that are totally in the indie space that don't work with publishers and make a living doing it. Publishers can provide a tremendous amount of value in the right sort of placement, the right publisher. They can be wonderful. Sometimes publishers just sort of kind of want to coast along on an author's momentum, and it's not as helpful. So it depends. It varies like any other type of arrangement. I've been very fortunate, for every publisher I've ever worked with, I've gotten something of value out of it. Maybe I didn't get book sales, but maybe I learned a lot about the industry. Currently, my relationship with my publishers is fantastic. I have I think works out really well. I'm with Thomas and Mercer, which is part of Amazon Publishing, and they kind of think about the publishing world sort of the same way I do. And that was helpful because I got my start less than 10 years ago. And when publishing was going through a big upheaval, and it continues to go through these upheavals. So that was, kind of a good fit. But to get there from where I started was just a matter of writing books, getting out there, and just keep repeating that over and over and over again. And that's one of the things that I would advise anybody out there who wants to get into publishing. I just played my own audio stream. There you go. Congratulations, Andrew. Getting out there is to keep at it. Be persistent about that. If you're getting good feedback on your books, if people like your books, sometimes it's a matter of time. Another thing to think about too, which we'll go into a bit if you like, is some books are easy to communicate to other people why they should read them. Books really move via word of mouth. They really, there's part of it is when people go read a review on Amazon, they decide if they want to read it, and then how they communicate it to somebody else. If you take a look at some of the most successful books, they're often very easily condensed. And I don't mean necessarily the elevator pitch, but somebody reading this by themselves can come up with a way to describe it. If you give a 10-year-old kid who has never heard of Harry Potter or anything like that, but you give them that book to read, and then afterwards you ask them to describe to you what it's about, they're going to say things like, oh, it's about a little boy who goes off to a school to learn magic. Or a little boy, he and his friends can do wizard spells. They can do this. They're going to have some very excitable ways to describe a book. And the same applies to grown-up books. A monster hit. the Da Vinci Code. Okay, Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, that book sold like crazy. And the way that, in that book outsold, there was a book that came before it, was Angels and Demons, was a predecessor to that, but Da Vinci Code just way outsold that. And the reason is, I think in part because it was very easy to communicate to somebody what it was. It's this thriller involving this historical mystery, and it touched upon religion, it touched upon aspects of history, etc. And so people can be excited about it and talk to people because it got to reveal all these sorts of things. I remember people who never read books who read that book and were very excited and how they described it to me. So that's one of the things to think about when you write and you want to get people to promote, communicate, talk about what you've done. How easily can they describe it to a friend? This is a question I pose to friends who are writing books. I spoke to a friend a while ago who was writing a nonfiction book. And my question was, I asked him to give me a description of it. And he gave me kind of a longish description. And I said, what's the other description? He gave me kind of the elevator pitch, but made it sound like 1,000 other books in that category. And then I asked a very simple question. How would your wife describe the book? And that was a question that stumped him because it was hard, because when the person who knows you the best and knows what you're doing can't easily explain what it's about, that's a challenge. It means that it's going to be hard for people to communicate to others why they should read it. Like, oh, you got to read. It's like when somebody says, oh, I heard the funniest thing, and you try to tell somebody it, and it's not funny. It's because something gets lost. We can't compress certain aspects of it. Really great stories with really great characters can be compressed enough that you can communicate to somebody that there's compressed enough that you see the value in it. You understand, oh, just thinking about that makes me excited to read this. So that doesn't mean that all great books have to be compressible or are compressible. Sometimes things take time. It's just, it will be communicated faster the more readily somebody's able to look at this and go, oh, that sounds really interesting. Ways to make sure that's the case is you might have something that sounds, oh, that sounds cool, but it's really too generic. Like, oh, it's an everyman against the world. Congratulations. That's like every book. You have to be more specific. And if it sounds like, well, it's like this and it's only like that, that's not as exciting. But if you say it's like this meets that, and those are two very different genres, then things get very interesting. And I love to do that. Like, if you take different genres and sort of mix them up, is it more interesting? You know, if you say, it's like The Godfather. Well, I could read the Godfather book. Oh, it's pretty good. But if you say, it's like The Godfather meets Jaws. What does that even mean? I don't know. But now I'm like, go on, explain to me what The Godfather meets Jaws is like. And then if you're like, I don't even know the pitch, we can make up a pitch on that, but that just all of a sudden takes it into a different direction and it becomes, I think, more interesting. So that's things to think about, is the transmissibility of your book. How can you help people understand what it's about? How can you get people to sort of communicate it to other people? And that starts with the basic idea. When I start writing a book, I do what I call a mission statement. And what that is, there's the outline, there's the descriptions, there's this, but I have a thing like my editor doesn't see this, my publisher never sees this, my agent never sees this. And that is what I say, what am I trying to accomplish in this book, which is where I want to start, where I want to end, and what I want to have happen throughout. And there might be things like, I want to have a lot of thrilling moments, like a lot of, exciting things that happen in close calls. Or I might have, in the case of my most recent book, Black Coral, I knew that I wanted this to be, it's my character Sloan on the hunt for a serial killer. And I knew in serial killer stories, you kind of want to have these sort of dark, suspenseful moments. And I wanted to have several of those. And sometimes it's not necessarily the character having to be in peril, but being in a scene or a situation where they see the aftermath of something. And this is something I do a lot in The Naturalist. For the new book that's coming out with Sloan called Sea Storm, I'm like, I want to go a little bit more sea, a little more ocean stuff, some more ocean adventures. And then I want to make it kind of more, a little bit globetrotting for my character. And I like to just sort of take it in different places. So that's what I do in my mission statement. If, somebody describes, Black Coral, the thing that I have working for me is my series is easy to describe Sloan. Each book might be harder, but Sloan, she's a police officer and a scuba diver. So you go, oh, cool. Water's probably going to come up a lot. for real. Theo Cray he's a scientist and he hunts serial killers. And so that series, I think part of the success of that is that it's easy to sort of compress down what is the kind of gestalt of it all. And that is that I have a character that knows a lot about science. And the same with my Jessica Blackwood. It doesn't mean you have to do these things. And these aren't like rules that you are forced to follow. But I found that it makes it a lot easier when I'm trying to, one, promote a book or get it out there. If the overall concept, and it doesn't mean there's only one way to condense it down. Harry Potter's about a lot of things, about, a chosen one against evil, about a society of secret magicians, all these other angles. And so really good stories have a lot of entry points at which you can describe it. People go, oh, cool. It doesn't describe the totality of it, but enough for somebody to be fascinated by it. So there you go. We'll go back to talk a bit about the Kindle Vella, which Kindle Vella is interesting. You have many different ways as writers that you can kind of put your books out there besides just books. You could write a book, sell it as a print book. You could sell it as an ebook. You could use a platform like Kindle Digital Publishing or Kindle Unlimited, where basically people can read as many books as they want, and you get paid a per page fee by Amazon. There's audiobooks. You can use a platform like Audible and release your book there. And that's one of the things you have to think about when you create content, is all the different platforms that it's going to go live on. Vella is a new platform that Amazon is launching, where you write a story and people read it chapter by chapter by chapter. And so as they get to the end of a chapter or a section, they then pay tokens to keep going forth. We could debate whether or not that's really the most efficient way to do storytelling. And is that any better than Kindle Unlimited, where if you just read a few pages in, decide to move on, you can move on. I think that it's designed, for Amazon and writers as sort of another way to make money, because maybe it gives you the option of a writer. You can put your stuff out there on a platform where a reader can read a certain amount of it and then decide they want to continue or not. And you still know fixed price how much you make per reader, versus the Kindle Unlimited. It's a variable sort of thing, and it's going to probably be less, but it's just another way to consume stuff. So the advantage to a reader is that there might be content on there that won't be available elsewhere. And I think it really lends itself to writing in genres where people or characters or stories just keep you kind of on the edge of your seat, where you got to see what happens next. And it also is the possibility that you could write a never-ending book. If you have interesting characters, you could just keep the story going and going and going and going, which would be interesting. And it could be different kinds of formats. It could be, you could create a character and a storyline and or do an anthology. You could just do stories set in a certain kind of setting or place and kind of keep going as far as you want. At some point, maybe you want to end it. If you end it, then you hope people come back to read the other one. But creating a new one creates a new entry point. One of the reasons I write multiple series is because I have lots of ideas for stories, but I know that if I wrote Jessica Blackwood, started that several years ago, and then I said, okay, I want to write a different character because I want to tell a different kind of story, but I also know that if people read, let's say, Theo Cray, then they might go discover Jessica. With Sloane McPherson, I knew, well, I'm going to get a certain kind of audience. And I think if they like Sloane, they're probably going to like Theo, and they're probably going to like Jessica. And so there's different sort of entry points which are in there. The advantage of doing a series over time is you build up your audience, you bring it from book to book. The disadvantage of a series is in theory, you can write your books in a way that there are multiple entry points. I try to do that. Like, I've had a number of people pick up Black Coral, and that's the first book they've read in it, and they go back and they enjoy Girl Beneath the Sea. And I try to write that way, but it still can be intimidating to people to try to figure out, where do I jump in? At what point do I come into this? But there are pros and cons. Stephen King rarely does series. He does have, series like Dark Tower, and there's a mythology, and he's done follow-ups like Dr. Sleep, etc. But he tends to sort of write one-offs. And the advantage of that is you get to start over fresh each time. You get to start clean and have a new story. But I would say even a case like Stephen King is that there are genres that he does. There are kinds of Stephen King stories. If you read The Stand and then you see, The Dome, or you read like mist, you realize like, oh, like there is big, huge disaster, group of people together trying to unite themselves and fight against this thing, but being divided. This is a common theme in those things. And that's perfectly fine. And so it might be these stories are not really connected. I mean, they have some tenuous sort of characters, whatever, aren't really connected in like a series kind of way, like a, Game of Thrones, but they are connected in that Stephen King can write a certain kind of story really well. So, and that's really the value of his brand. Like Stephen King has such a powerful brand name that all you kind of care about is, well, it's Stephen King. Well, I guess that sounds good to me. Versus other authors like Ian Fleming, he's primarily known for James Bond. But what a thing to be known for. This guy wrote a ton of James Bond novels. That's a character that endures to this day. You've had comic book writers. Bob Kane, also with like Bill Finger, was creator, unofficially, but really Finger was, co-creator of Batman. And Batman is, like Batman is approaching, when did the first Batman comic come out? Let's pull this up. Detective Comics number 27 was 1939. First Superman comic would have been Amazing Stories, which was 1938. These characters are getting on over 80 plus years. But in the case of like Siegel and Schuster, we know them for Superman, and Bob Kane is who we know for Batman. And what a legacy. That's perfectly fine. If you can write one thing for the rest of your life, some authors would sound frustrating, but most authors don't get the chance to write anything that other people ever read or see. So what would you rather do? And in any event, I kind of like to sort of, switch around and kind of write different, genres and sort of move into whatever I want, because I'm writing because I'm, writing for me and what's going to be the most fun. And I think that's the end of the day. You have to think about like, what is it's going to be, the most fun for you. There is a balance between that and then also trying to have a career. And maybe, I love science fiction, and I've written a few science fiction books, and that's something I probably will go back to from point to point when I have the chance. But I kind of know that my happiest place with me and reaching an audience is probably thriller mystery. And also, if I wrote the science fiction kind of stuff I really, really wanted to write, I don't think anybody would read it. It'd just probably be like, too nerdy. But, you find that balance. Anyhow, if you have a question, and you're live, if you have a question later on, well, you can ask me on Twitter. In fact, right now, if you have a question, you can just hit me up at Twitter at Andrew Main and ask me anything you're curious about. Otherwise, I'm going to keep talking here. And you may have noticed at the very beginning, this is my little mascot here. He's a sloth. He's my spirit animal. I'm a very lazy person. I try to do a lot of things, but I try to find the most efficient way to do them because I just get bored very, very quickly. And that's one of the biggest problems of being a creative is how do you overcome how quickly we become bored with what we're trying to do? And I think one of the ways you do that is you figure out how to dive deeper into something. You figure out how to explore something on a different level. As I try to grow as a writer, I think about how can I do more in a sentence? How can I do more in a scene? How can I accomplish a lot more going on? Which is one of the things I see in like really great movies is that, when I watch something with my girlfriend, I'll sometimes stop. We're annoying to each other because we do that, but you stop and you look at it and you go, how much has happened or what's going on here? A great scene, you go watch like old Spielberg movies and you see multiple things happening in just one scene. And that's really, really great storytelling. You can tell, sometimes people can't tell why a movie feels like empty or not much there. It's often because in one scene, only one thing happens. Only one thing gets established, which seems on paper like that's fine, but in reality, you want things to be a little bit more dense. While one thing's getting resolved, something else is unfolding or some other bit of information is coming across our path. And so really good storytelling is figuring out how to put as much as you can in there, how to put as much meaning, not some sort of symbolic kind of meaning, but just the idea that the story is, we talk about multi-layered. There's a lot of these little issues. A great example, a couple of great examples is the opening scene of The Godfather, or the opening, the opening part of it it takes place at a wedding, which on the surface is like, they're having a wedding. What's the big deal? But within that scene, you see so much detail about the life of organized crime, the characters involved, etc. You have, Michael Corleone, who's sitting there with Kate, his, uh, fiance. We see what's going on with, him explaining the world to her, him explaining to us somebody who's on the inside but sees himself as part of an outside. Then you have the inside where, his father is conducting business. You move around and you see all these different elements, even including the police on the outside who are taking photographs of the license plates. It's a very well layered scene that establishes so much. So much is going on. If it was just Don Corleone is in his office, having a meeting with people, which is where it starts. It starts off with the man saying, "I believe in America." It would be good, but what made it great is, why is this taking place here? What's going on? What's going on in this world? And it feels like a very real world. It doesn't just feel like a couple people talking in a room where we have to imagine everything else that's going outside. We have a wedding going on, but then the relationships between everything, the dynamics, all that's set up so well. I'm a big fan of a lot of Marvel movies, and I say that without reservation, because some Marvel movies, like some Pixar movies, if you watch the first few minutes of Up, you get an entire character's journey right there. So by the time we meet the old character played by Ed Asner, you understand why he's bitter. We understand what he went through. We know so much about him, but just condensed into a few minutes. It doesn't matter that later on the movie goes into sort of this wild, crazy place and this sort of weird resolution. We're so invested in the character early on, it works out great. Spider-Man Homecoming. Okay. That first 10 minutes of that movie, the first 10 minutes of the movie are about Vulture, Michael Keaton's character. Okay. We watch a guy who goes from just a guy trying to feed his family, blue collar kind of guy, the aftermath of the Battle of New York from the Avengers. We see what the world is like. What is the world like for an average person there? And he gets this construction cleanup job, and it seems great. And he gets it yanked away from him by forces that are just above him. He lives in a world where the gods fight, and they're left, humans are left, the mortals are left among the rubble trying to figure out what's next and kind of fighting over scraps. And you see in that first 10 minutes, you watch you get the idea when you meet him later on and he's a villain. You know why this happened. It wasn't like he was just sitting somewhere, going, when did they get a load of me? He got screwed over, saw some opportunity that would benefit himself, and then took kind of this Breaking Bad sort of turn where he liked being a powerful guy. He liked being the bad guy. And he went from a guy that was just trying to get by to a guy willing to drop a building on a kid because, listen, once you go down that path, and that's a great, great storytelling. We all start somewhere. Where does this character start? So in the first 10 minutes of that movie, we get a great mini story. And that's one of the things I love when I watch films is how much happens in that first 10 minutes. That doesn't mean it has to be montage and overly done, but how well can you establish something early on? We just watched, the movie Midnight Cowboy, okay, which is a movie that it feels like a 70s movie, but this was actually like 1968, 1969. Let me pull this up. And you watch the first 1969, the first few minutes where you meet John Voight's character living in this middle of nowhere, Joe Buck living in this middle of nowhere town, and the world he's leaving, very, very well established. You get a sense of who he is, what's going to go on. You're kind of pulled into him. And then when you throw this guy into New York City, it's going to be interesting because New York City at that point in time was a scary place. But things that establish very early on and set you on the path is great. And that's one of the things that I think about. Think about your first 10 pages of your book. Think about your first paragraphs. Think about this. How pulled in are people there? That doesn't mean you have to make stuff up and use cheap tricks to kind of hold their attention. Although if you want to, that's fine. It just means how interesting can you make it? And the first 10 minutes of a movie, the first 10 pages of a book, that often just decides what's going to hold on to us. I love good science fiction, and I even like sometimes really good military science fiction. But when I pick up a book and it's like, Sergeant so-and-so of the Flying Copperhead Space Force decided that today was and I'm like, I'm kind of done. To me, it's like, it's not that. Some people love that, but for me, it's not just throwing a bunch of jargon. It's putting people into there and kind of pulling them in. So Anyhow, this has been an interesting experiment using the YouTube platform to go talk to people here. I'm going to stick around here for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to leave this up so it will be there in perpetuity, be live forever and ever, or until I delete it. And we can do this again. I'll give some announcement to people in advance, so if people want to bring in questions, etc. Happy to talk about that. I love to talk about writing. I love to talk about creativity, and there's really no excuse for me not doing it more often, although I just get sidetracked on projects. Like I just finished writing a book, and now I've got a bunch of edits I've got to do on a book. And we can talk about that process too. I do very, very rough first drafts, like very rough first drafts. But I do incredibly detailed outlines. So when I have to go revise a book, my structure is there. I've only had long time ago in ancient history, I had an editor who had an issue with my structure, and I'm like, no, I'm sticking by it. And, that structure stayed, and that book did really well. And you have to sort of have an idea of what you are and who you are as a writer. And that's certainly something we could talk about in another video, about how to weigh input, how do you need to have a feedback loop. You need to be able to get input from the outside world if you're trying to write for the outside world. And that is something that can make some people very temperamental. And I know early on as a writer, I'd be much more sensitive about it. Now I have a pretty centered idea of who I am. And I can also, people say, what about this? What about this? And I'll be like, yeah, no, I could have done this better. Could have done this better. But it doesn't really faze me. I saw a tweet by a filmmaker who I really respected, who was kind of critical about the fact that a friend of his who used to be pretty successful was critiquing some of his movies. And this person was sort of frustrated. There's like, I've already made them. There's nothing I can do about them. I get that. I really get that. Because sometimes like you get criticism like, well, why did you do this? What is? And if there's surface things you can't fix, it's fine. But sometimes there are structural things. Like, sometimes people like, I noticed in this movie you did this. And that might be kind of like, a pattern to say, hey, why do you keep doing this? And so, but it was interesting to see this filmmaker was very sensitive about it. Like on Twitter, like, oh, I don't talk to this person anymore. I'm like, if they were your friend, like, I mean, if my friends couldn't criticize me, why be my friend? Not to say that I'm the easiest person to, take criticism, like probably not. But point is, you want to be in a position where you're able to sort of accept that and balance it. It doesn't mean you have to accept every single thing, but you don't want to be in a place where you say, nope, go into my bubble, nothing makes its way through, which isn't healthy, nor do you need to obsess over every note. But again, it's a matter of balance, things to talk about. And as you get more experienced, ideally, you know what your flaws are before other people point them out. Early on, maybe not so much because you haven't established a pattern, but later on your pattern can kind of emerge. And I know, I mean, I have my little secret list of like flaws that I know that, keep cropping up that I'm like, well, I'll try to address this, whatever. I'm like, I'm too lazy to fix that. Not to say that I'm aware of everything. God knows, you have no idea what other people pay attention to. Anyhow, this has been really fun. I will be talking to you all soon. If you get a chance, check out my books, Girl Beneath the Sea, Black Coral, and coming soon, Mastermind. I'm Ed Main. Have a great day.